We all have this fascination with mountains. Their high, soaring peaks have a beauty and life that is beyond ourselves. For some of us, they present a challenge to climb to the top, to stand on the roof of the world and see the vast expanse below. Others of us are content to view their beauty from a distance, from the base of the mountain. Either way, mountains inspire us. Their inaccessibility speaks of mystery, and their size inspires awe. For many ancient peoples, the awe and mystery they evoked spoke to them of the awe, the grandeur, and the mystery of God. Think of the ancient Israelites camped out around Mount Sinai. As they looked up the mountain, as they saw the storm swirling around its peak, they knew they were in the presence of God. Only their leader, Moses, had the courage to go up the mountain, and there he encountered the great I Am, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, the Holy One of Israel. When Moses went up the mountain for 40 days, he came back changed. His face shone with a radiance that so disturbed the people, he took to wearing a veil over his face. Mountains are holy places where we are transformed by the living God. When I was growing up, our family went to Maine for summer vacation for a number of years. My mother loved the sea, and the coast of Maine was the closest seacoast we could drive to. To get there, we traveled through the mountains of Vermont and New Hampshire. On one trip through the mountains, we got caught in a thunderstorm. As our car slowly wound its way up the highway, hugging the side of the mountain, the rain came down in torrents that were so hard that the steady beating of the windshield wipers barely kept the road visible before us. And inside the car, it was hot and humid and very tense. My dad never liked driving through the mountains at the best of times, so of course, with this thunderstorm, he was really very uncomfortable. No one said a word. No one could. The thunderous drumming on the roof of the car made any conversation almost impossible. Suddenly, a bend in the road took us out of the dark bank of cloud and rain. The gray abruptly changed to blue sky, and sunlight poured through the trees onto the road. On our right, the road dropped away, and we could see beyond the trees to the rain-swept valley below. And in the distance, green rolling hills stretched out before us, drenched in the golden light of the late afternoon sun. The thunderous rain on the roof of the car was replaced by silence. We opened up the windows and let the cool air in. You can tell this was before air conditioning. And the tenseness in the car, it just melted away. It was like coming out of a cave, one of those awe moments when we were buoyed up by sunlight and fresh air. And that is what I imagine Peter, John, and James felt when they went up the mountain with Jesus. As they climbed higher and higher, they left the demands of the crowds, the tension of accusation, the sting of criticism behind, up higher and higher into the sunlight, into the cool, fresh air, into the peace and solitude of the mountain. There on the slope, they stopped and prayed. The disciples almost fell asleep as tension fell away from them, but they didn't. Luke tells us they remained awake. And there on the slope of the mountain, they witnessed God's timeless glory breaking through. Jesus' face was changed. His robes became a brilliant white, and two figures appeared with him, Moses and Elijah. Jesus spoke with them about his coming departure, his death in Jerusalem. And up there on the mountain, the disciples experienced the eternal presence of God breaking into time and space. They experienced the beauty, the holiness, the goodness of God, which is God's glory. The perception of reality was changed. Peter was so overwhelmed, he wanted to stay up there on the mountain with Jesus, Elijah, and Moses. He even offered to build them 3 dwellings, as if by doing so, he could capture this inbreaking of glory and hold on to it forever. But even as he spoke, a cloud descended over them, The thunderous voice was heard to say, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." Now, Jesus had just been speaking privately with his disciples, and he had revealed to them that he was going to Jerusalem, and there he would suffer death at the hands of the religious authorities. But he also told them that he would rise on the third day. And the disciples, who found this incomprehensible, basically ignored it. It was a future they didn't want to face. It was a future that terrified them, that given their druthers, they would do anything to change. And here was this voice instructing them to listen to the chosen one. Up on the mountain, away from the stresses and fears of life, it was easy to stay connected to God, to live within God's glory. Down the mountain, it was not so easy. They were to face a bitter and fear-filled future, which made obedience difficult. But staying up on the mountain was not an option for Jesus or for them. So down the mountain they went, back to the circumstances of their lives, back to the demanding crowds, the criticism, that feeling of impending doom. But that experience up the mountain was never forgotten. It strengthened them for the days ahead. We all have our mountaintop experiences, times when the presence of God is particularly close, time when the glory of God's love and beauty and goodness break through our reality, and we catch a glimpse of God's eternal being that is beyond all time and space. Maybe in the midst of a struggle, at a bedside or a graveside, that the meaning of the gospel and the nature of God becomes clear to us in ways that transcend ordinary experience. Experiences such as these leave a profound mark on our souls, and we never forget them. Fred Buckner experienced this transcendence of God at the bedside of his child in a hospital 3,000 miles from home. He wrote, "In a hospital in that city, there was somebody I loved as much as I have ever loved anybody, and she was in danger of dying. Apparently not even death itself was as terrifying to her as life was, and for that reason she was fighting against her own healing. When the worst finally happens, or almost happens, a kind of peace comes. I had passed beyond grief, beyond terror, all but beyond hope, and it was there in that wilderness that for the first time in my life I caught sight of something of what it must be like to love God truly. And in that wilderness, several small things happened that were not of that wilderness because they were of a far country. Two total strangers found their way to me, both of them ministers, offering more than just help because what they offered was themselves in a way that made me understand for the first time what the word Christendom means, Christ domain, the King's kingdom. And one night I heard Compline sung in a great bare church, sat in the coolness and dimness of it with nothing I had to say or be or do, just to let the chanting voices, brave, dispassionate, unearthly, wash over me like air from a far country. And quite by accident, if there are such things as accidents at times like these, I opened the Bible one evening to Psalm 131, which, if I'd ever read it before, I read only as words, but which became now the ones I most needed to hear. O Lord, my heart is not lifted up, my eyes are not raised too high. I do not occupy myself with things too great and too marvelous for me, but I have calmed and quieted my soul, like a child quieted at its mother's breast. Like a child that is quieted is my soul." 3 small incidences that came to Buckner, as he said, from a far country. That is often our mountaintop experience, a moment beyond all time and space when God is clearly, brilliantly with us through the presence of others, through music, through the words of Scripture. Such experiences last briefly, but they stay with us a lifetime. There is a power in them that carries us. There is a power in them that prepares us to deal with the circumstances of our lives. And we would like to hang on to them, to stay in them, much as the disciples wanted to stay up on the mountainside. Yet it is down the mountain, within the situations of our daily lives, that we grow in trust and hope and following. That is why we can't stay up there. We need to make our way down to engage the challenges of our lives. The new year of 1998 found Peter, Murray, and I in Mount Tremblant. My sister and her family were there from England for a ski holiday, and we joined them for a week. It was beautiful up the mountain, amazing cross-country ski trails, beautiful scenery, great weather. It was a time to reconnect with family, to share time together, to relax and enjoy the surroundings. But all good things must come to an end, and so we packed up and prepared to go home. The day before we left, we heard something about an ice storm that had blown through. We didn't hear too much about it, though, because we had lost the television signal for most of the day. Up on the mountain, it had snowed, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. So we left, under beautiful blue skies, brilliantly lighting up the newly fallen snow. At the base of the mountain, we found the road that would take us to the 401 and started driving. And as we followed the road, the first thing we noticed was that nothing was open. Then we came to a swath of power line poles, all broken, it seemed, at exactly the same place. Miles upon miles of broken poles along the deserted road. And we understood why nothing was open. No one had any power. At one point we were stopped and convoyed around a piece of road that was littered with live power lines. The detour took us along a small road that had become a tunnel. The tree branches overhead bent over by a coating of ice, meeting at the top. It was very beautiful, but we also recognized how deadly it was. By late afternoon, we were on the 401, and again, no traffic, or so it seemed. And in the median, large tractor trailers were lying on their sides. It felt like a war zone, deadly quiet, with no one but us traveling on that road. As dusk fell, we started to see the occasional light in the farmhouse window. And we were hopeful that we had reached a place that had electricity, but Peter kept looking out the window and saying, looking really close and saying, no, that's candlelight. That's candlelight. No light. Finally, we reached Kingston. And yes, there was electricity, but only in half the city. We scrambled to find a hotel that had a room and a restaurant, and I was never so thankful as when we finally found a place to lay our heads. Coming down the mountain and traveling through the devastation below was not easy. It would have been lovely to stay up there, away from the challenge the ice storm presented us, but we had no choice. We had to get home. And we really had no idea until we were down the mountain just how devastating that ice storm had been. Otherwise, I think we probably would have stayed put, but we didn't. Coming down from our mountaintop experiences back to the stresses of our lives is difficult. And I imagine that is how the disciples felt. I imagine that is how Jesus felt. Shortly after the story, Luke tells us that Jesus set his face like flint towards Jerusalem, determined to finish what he had begun, but affirmed in his decision by his mountaintop experience. At their best, dreams, epiphanies, visions can give new meaning to the whole of our lives, making our purpose clear in the midst of life's journey. But they also point us back to the tasks and struggles that give our lives meaning and growth. Discipleship involves following, going on. Faithfulness is not achieved by freezing the moment, but by following on in the confidence that God is leading us that what lies ahead is even greater than what we have already experienced. The view from the top may be majestic, but the road beckons us on. And as we come down the mountain, we are assured that God's goodness and God's power will carry us. Thanks be to God. Amen.